Hey kids, I'm just doing our El Studiantes or something like that. I'm going to go over Egypt with you from the slideshow, and then I'll post this. You should see it on YouTube and such. So, the main river in Egypt is the Nile River. It's called the lifeblood of Egypt because it provides Egypt really with any kind of livelihood in that area because it's surrounded by desert. So, without the Nile River, Egypt would not have existed. We talked a little bit about how that Egypt is sort of flipped upside down, where Upper Egypt's in the south and Lower Egypt's in the north. And at the end of that river is a delta. Delta is an area that part of the river where it breaks off into smaller little tributaries, and it is very fertile and lots of silt in that area. We discussed the cataracts, the boulder rapid like areas in the Nile River that gave the Egyptians natural protection, and it allowed them to stay safe. Armies could not go up the river without dealing with these cataracts, and they definitely didn't want to cross a desert. We talked earlier about the Nile Delta. Notice the green area there in that picture is the Nile Delta from a satellite image, and how that the Nile Delta is going to be the most fertile area in Egypt, and that's where most of your population is going to live. The Egyptians used irrigation and canals, just like a lot of these early civilizations on the Nile River, for their fields. We said that first Egypt had two kingdoms. You had your upper and lower kingdoms, and your first pharaoh to unite the kingdoms was Menes, known as the Scorpion King. No, it's not The Rock, even though Hollywood loosely made a movie about it, but Menes was the first pharaoh where he united the bowling pin crown to the crown that I guess sort of looks like a lotus leaf, and that's what you get. Kings of Egypt were called pharaohs, which literally means big house, and they ruled in dynasties, families of rulers, where the oldest son would be the next in line to become pharaoh. There are three time periods in ancient Egyptian history. You had your Old Kingdom, which was 2700 BC to 2200 BC. This is going to be a time of great building, like the pyramids and the Sphinx and such. The pharaohs in the Old Kingdom were considered gods, and they were worshipped as gods. And then we discussed, if you remember, we watched a video of this building of the pyramid by Khufu. Khufu had the Great Pyramid at Giza built, and we looked at how that would have been done and how long it would have taken. And it was built as a tomb for him. And then we looked at the inside of what it would look like, etc., and how big each one of these stones were, and how just a unbelievable situation to get these stones chiseled out and moved to the side of the pyramid. We talked about the social hierarchy of Egypt, how you had the pharaoh up top with the royal vizier, which is your advisors, your priests, officials, scribes, and slave laborers and peasants at the bottom. Egypt was polytheistic. They had believed in many, many gods. Some of their main gods, Ra, Horus, Osiris, Isis, all had to deal with their daily life. We talked about how they resembled a lot of the animals that they saw on a daily basis. We discussed the mummification process, and we mummified our peach in my class, and we talked about the ways they did this and their belief in the afterlife and the steps of mummification. They were placed in a sarcophagus and in their tomb, and this, of course, was only for your wealthy. If you remember, if you weren't wealthy, you could still be mummified to an extent, but you didn't get the whole treatment of the whole process of mummification. If you remember, a lot of them were just buried in the desert, in the dry and the arid desert to dry them out. We talked about the fall of the Old Kingdom due to civil wars and famines and taxes, which led to a foreign group to come in and take over in the Middle Kingdom called the Hyksos people. The Hyksos people from Asia, and they came and they ruled Egypt for 250 years. And if you remember, we discussed how the Hyksos liked the Egyptian culture so much that they adopted it as their own. The Middle Kingdom came to an end when a pharaoh by the name of, or a warrior by the name of Ahmose comes and leads a rebellion against the Hyksos, and they are removed from power, starting the new kingdom. Some Egyptian achievements we discuss: hieroglyphics, the writing of the Egyptians, the pictographs there, papyrus, the reed-like paper that they would use and made. And then we started talking about the New Kingdom and how that your traditional Egyptians came back into power. And this is a time of Egyptian dominance where they take a lot of Mesopotamia and Nubia and Kush and Syria and all the surrounding areas. They became very wealthy because they expected something called a tribute from these areas, saying basically, you pay us money and we're not going to come and beat you up, basically. Trade routes started to flourish where the Egyptians were trading all around the Mediterranean and through Mesopotamia. We discussed Queen Hatshepsut, the first female pharaoh, whose son died, or whose husband died, and her stepson was not old enough to reign, so she was a regent for a while. She dressed as a man for political reasons, and she had the Temple of Thebes built. But after her death, her stepson removed any kind of statues of her because of the hatred he had towards her taking power from him at a young age. There's the Temple of Thebes. The most famous pharaoh of the New Kingdom was Ramses the Great. He is considered possibly to be the pharaoh during the Exodus with Moses. He made a pact with the first peace treaty with the Hittites, and had a lot of monuments built around about himself through Egypt. A lot of the monuments and stuff that are in museums are Ramses because he really liked himself. Daily life of the Egyptians. Women had right to own property, and divorce and children started their profession at age 14. The Rosetta Stone, one of the most important artifacts in history that taught us to read hieroglyphics. 3 parts of it were different languages. 2 parts were Greek. 1 part was hieroglyphics. We did not know how to read hieroglyphics at the time. We read the first 2 and realized that it was saying the same thing in Greek, and some hieroglyphics that they did know, they could piece together and realize that this could be be able for us to decipher hieroglyphics. Other Egyptian advancements, the Book of the Dead was one of their spell books, and then an obelisk, these huge pillars that we looked at, like the one that we have. We took that idea and made the Washington Monument. And then lastly, we talked a little bit about Nubia and Kush, how they basically copied the Egyptian culture and used a lot of the same ideas the Egyptians did. They were more darker skinned individuals, and they at one time ruled Egypt for a short period of time. They would be considered what is now Sudan, country of Sudan. All right, hopefully that helps. Let me know if you have any questions, and we'll get this video up for you to use.